Margaret Bellows discovered time travel the same way she discovered most household efficiencies, by accident and with mild irritation. The instruction manual called it a temporal domestic synchronizer, which sounded like a washing machine attachment and was therefore ignored. It arrived in a crate stamped property of the Department of Defense, which also felt familiar. Her husband had left it in the garage next to the lawnmower with a note that said, "Do not touch." Naturally, she touched it. There was a flash like a camera bulb, a smell like overheated toast, and then Margaret was standing on a sidewalk in Manhattan, wearing her good pearls and holding a handbag that now contained $73 in unfamiliar bills. A man in a straw boater tipped his hat and called her a swell dame. Margaret adjusted her gloves. She had always suspected the future would be rude, but she was unprepared for the past to be charming. Within a week, she was installed in a hotel suite that cost more per night than her mortgage back home, though she had no mortgage back home yet, which was confusing, but she decided not to dwell on it. Dwelling led to headaches. The hotel had a ballroom, a barber, and a man whose sole job appeared to be pressing elevator buttons with spiritual devotion. Everyone was very rich or pretending to be. Margaret found the difference academic. She learned quickly. Stock tips were exchanged the way recipes were back home, casually and with confidence that bordered on moral certainty. Everyone knew the market would go up because it always had. This was said with the same tone used for gravity and the flu. Margaret invested because everyone else did. She invested because the men at dinner parties smiled indulgently when she asked questions, which made her ask more. She invested because the numbers went up and because the numbers going up felt like order. She bought dresses that required no practical justification. She drank champagne before noon and learned to smoke cigarettes she did not inhale. She had opinions about modern art and no idea what they were based on. Occasionally, she felt a twinge of guilt, which she treated with oysters. The cracks were subtle at first. A waiter mentioned his brother could not find work, which was odd because the streets were full of men who seemed very busy shouting instructions. A banker laughed too loudly at his own jokes. A woman at a luncheon confessed she had sold her grandmother's silver and then asked if Margaret thought silver was a good buy. Margaret thought of her own silver back home, wrapped carefully in newspaper that warned of international tensions and the importance of gelatin salads. She began to notice the papers. They were enthusiastic in a way that felt rehearsed. Headlines promised prosperity with the intensity of a sermon. When bad news appeared, it was framed as temporary, instructive, or someone else's fault. At a party on Park Avenue, a man with a red face explained that regulation was unnecessary because markets were self-correcting. He said this while knocking over a crystal ashtray and not correcting it. Margaret smiled politely and thought of her washing machine. She tried to warn people. She tried it gently at first, the way one suggested a different cooking temperature. She said things like, "It might be wise to keep some cash on hand," or "Sometimes things change faster than expected." People laughed. They told her she was adorable. One man patted her arm and said fear was a feminine habit. Margaret had been managing a household for 12 years. She knew exactly how fast things could fall apart when ignored. The foreboding settled in like humidity. The city felt louder, sharper. Music played faster. People drank more and slept less. Margaret saw men staring at ticker tape with the devotion of gamblers and the expression of men watching a slow train approach.
Excellent.
She dreamed of the future she had left behind. In those dreams, the appliances were reliable and the optimism was quieter. She missed the sound of vacuum cleaners and the particular calm of knowing exactly what was expected of her. One afternoon, she visited the stock exchange itself. It was not impressive in the way she had imagined. It was crowded, sweaty, and deeply emotional. Men shouted numbers like prayers. The air vibrated with certainty and panic in equal measure. Margaret felt the same sensation she felt when a cake failed to rise. You could still eat it, but you knew something essential had gone wrong. She left early. That night she sat alone in her suite and counted her money. She could leave. The device was still in her handbag, warm and faintly humming, like a cat with poor manners. She could return to her own time, where the crash was history and not destiny. Instead, she went to bed. In the morning, the city sounded different. There was a pause between noises, as if the streets were holding their breath. Margaret dressed carefully. She chose a sensible hat. The news arrived in waves. First confusion, then disbelief, then something like grief. Men ran, women cried. Papers shouted what they had whispered yesterday. Margaret stood at her window and watched wealth evaporate with remarkable efficiency. It reminded her of boiling water. She did not feel satisfaction. She felt tired. When she returned home, which she did quietly and without witnesses, the garage smelled the same. Her husband was still at work. Dinner needed planning. Margaret put the device back in its crate and labeled it seasonal decorations. At supper, her husband mentioned the market was doing well. Margaret nodded and passed the salt. She had learned something important. Time travel did not change history. It only clarified it, and clarity, she had found, was rarely profitable, but it was useful.